Welcome back to another legal studies teacher reads the news. This is a quick one, which is for, I'm thinking, consumers. So, particularly this idea of the issues of compliance and non-compliance, and it's not as clear as it could be, but also the idea of the role of law reform in recognising the rights of consumers, and I'll explain that in a second. Also, probably as well, laws relating to consumers as a reflection of changing values and ethical standards. This is by John Fain, former ABC journalist. He was a radio host for a long time there, and he's talking about this new Jobkeeper program. This is what he says. The ATO, the Australian Taxation Office, the ATO just got a gift. That's what it's called. And it's an opinion piece. Note that. There's a difference when you're reading the newspaper between a factual account and an opinion piece. John Fain. The legacy of the new JobKeeper program, so this is a program where the Morrison government is giving out up to $1,500 a fortnight in welfare payments to people who have lost their jobs due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The legacy of the new JobKeeper program will last longer than just the COVID-19 rebuild. When John Howard and Peter Costello, former Prime Minister and Treasurer during John Howard's Prime Ministership, brought in the GST, so that's a 10% tax on a whole bunch of goods and services. That's what it stands for, goods and services tax. We were promised the black economy would disappear. Now, I'm going to explain a whole bunch of this because it's relatively important. So the black economy is seen as basically people who do not take part in the taxation system the way it's supposed to happen. So if someone comes over and paints my house and they say, please pay in cash, what they might do is they might quote me $3,000 to paint my house if I pay in cash. And then when they receive that money, they only say to their accountant, I charge them $1,500. And then therefore they have provided tax on that $1,500 and they've called it official income, but they've actually pocketed $1,500 without paying tax on it. That's why it's called the black economy. They promised the GST would disappear. The GST would make the black economy disappear. It didn't. But the JobKeeper assistance scheme and COVID-19 may succeed where the GST did not, with a permanent change to the economy. The genius of the mechanism is funneling it through the Australian Taxation Office. That was done for pragmatic reasons. In other words, it was just the most simple, easiest way to do it. It is quicker and simpler to distribute the dollars through existing systems than to instantly create a new one. And out of the ATO and Centrelink, who would you trust more? But it means that anyone putting their hand out for help, employer or employee, is dancing with the tax office. He's just using colloquial language here to say you want to receive assistance from the government, you have to actually open up your books to the tax office. Tax returns up to date, tax debt, child support, turnover that appears only on that other spreadsheet. Can't explain how such a low income is supporting that many staff. So this is basically him just opening up a whole bunch of questions about people who do dodgy things with their tax. And he understands that his audience get what he means. So tax debt. Do you owe the tax office a lot of money? Child support. Are you behind on your child support? Have you split with your partner and you owe child support? If that's the case, if you're asking for money from the Australian Tax Office, they're going to say, sure, by the way, you also owe $5,000 in child support. Turnover that appears only on the other spreadsheet. In other words, you've got an official thing that says this is how much my company makes, and you've actually got the other spreadsheet where you actually work out how much money they make. Can't explain how such a low income is supporting that many staff. In other words, you're getting all this cash in and you're not paying tax on it. Killing the cash economy was not the motivation for putting the ATO in charge, but it certainly will have that effect. Capturing those outside the legitimate economy has been but a dream for treasurers of all persuasions. Now it comes true. The superstar of the crisis is Josh Frydenberg. He's the Australian Federal Treasurer, who cannot believe his good fortune. Never waste a crisis indeed. So that's a common saying, never waste a crisis. And he's basically implying there that Josh Frydenberg's done this to try and also kill the cash economy. Last year, he barely had time to get his feet under the desk when he had to deliver what everyone, including he, thought was an outgoing government budget. Now he gets to play the pivotal role in the greatest challenge of a generation. And it turns out the Treasurer has been remarkably good at it. Remember, this is an opinion piece, so it's okay to give your opinion strongly and to try, he's going to back it up. Together with Senator Matthias Cormann and ATO boss Steve Kennedy, the group chaired by Prime Minister Scott Morrison has come up with a package that saves us from disaster. It puts a floor under the market in exactly the same way Kevin Rudd, he was Prime Minister at the time, did with the banks in the global financial crisis. It restores confidence we are not all doomed. Our government will not stand passively watching. It is alongside us. Panic sackings and panic resignations paused. So this concept of saying this money that they're pumping in, it's $130 billion in 6 months. It's a huge amount of money. And he's basically saying this has helped kind of put a floor under the economy. It's going to stop the economy from crashing. And it is working. The unions even like it. The end of tribalism, don't believe it. But the many strange yet strong relationships being forged through this crisis will be of lasting and enduring benefit long after the emergency. And it must be a delight when premiers and treasurers sit down with federal counterparts and talk about how much money will be handed over instead of how much will be squeezed. In other words, the GST collects all the money from the states, and then the federal government spends that money however it decides to spend it. And what it's basically saying is the federal government's giving the states money now as part of this Jobkeeper situation. Not surprising to see heroic outbreaks of unimaginable harmony. This is John Fain here. He's writing an opinion piece. He's obviously using very colourful imagery, and he's kind of getting his point across in a kind of colloquial, larrikin type way. Then he starts talking about the economy starting up again. We won't go through all of this. We'll just do it very quickly, some of it. Attention's already turning to the best way to manage the awakening of the economy. It cannot go from 0 to 100 miles per hour overnight. Restrictions can only be lifted gradually to ensure no rebound of the virus. Who starts back first, baristas or barristers, clothes shops or tattooists? Everyone will argue they ought to have priority. Not all are going to get it. Some decisions will have more impact than others. It is vital to have a pragmatic discussion about how to harness billions in local superannuation funds, ideology aside. Some people resent the industry funds and their union connections. Now they need them. Australia in the future needs to be more resilient and self-sufficient. Superannuation funds are a vital piece in that puzzle. So just a reminder here, superannuation was set up by Paul Keating. It's this concept, I talked about it in a recent video as well, if you want to check that out. It's the concept that employers have to give 9.5% of your income to you and put it in a fund that is looked after by a superannuation fund, and you're not allowed to touch that money. That money is taxed at a much lower rate, and basically what it is it's saving up, it's enforced savings for you when you turn 65, and then you can use that to help augment your income so that the government isn't paying everyone a full aged pension. It's basically enforced business or corporate savings, so the government isn't put out when this massive generation of baby boomers ends up retiring, and which is happening now, and we don't have enough money to pay for them. So why is this article helpful for consumers? I think it's a helpful article to think through when we're talking about consumers, the idea that it's not just this topic of here is a person spending $1 and that's a consumer and that's what it is. I think it's helpful to try and look at it from a macro, kind of stepping back and looking at it a big picture kind of idea, especially this issue of compliance and non-compliance. Often we think of, when we think of consumers, is this idea of it's a company not complying with the Corporations Act. And that is completely true. But there's also this concept of compliance and non-compliance when it comes to businesses and small businesses not paying their fair share of tax. We often see this most in huge companies that use all of the means at their disposal so that they might have some money in Ireland, or they might have some money in the Bahamas, and they're paying no tax in Australia by doing this, and this dodgy kind of tactics in order to lower their tax bill and pay practically nothing in Australia. Now that harms us as a nation. Our tax is the government's ability to spend money to look after its citizens. So for every dollar that I spend on Google, on Microsoft, on Apple, there should be an X percentage of that coming back to the Australian government so that they can provide services like hospitals, roads, schools, etc. Now, if Google is going to be non-compliant and to find ways of getting around having a big tax bill so that they can have ridiculously big profits, those profits are going to a much smaller percentage of people that own shares in their company. And so the role of the consumer is to be protected from that. It's not just, them ripping me off when I pay my dollars for whatever service that they're providing. It's actually the idea that if you're taking part in the economy, well, then you should be paying your fair share of tax so that the government is providing services so that I can be a citizen here and spend that money as a teacher. I'm buying an iPad or something like that. The iPad's hooking up to the NBN, which the government's provided money for, so I can watch Disney, the streaming service. If Disney's taking my money, my $8.99 a month, but not actually giving its fair share of tax, well, then that's going to harm me, the consumer. So this idea of the ATO's just got a gift, I think, is smack on the money when it comes to this idea of getting rid of the cash economy. A lot of Australians, it's only this and this, it doesn't really matter too much. No. If Australians are supposed to look out for each other and have a fair go, well, then paying cash and not actually properly putting it into the registry. Look, plenty of people pay cash and actually do the right thing. Actually say the house was $3,000, they get cash, they use the money for this, this, and this, but they tell their accountant the right thing. But we see constantly this ripping off of the consumer. And when I say consumer, I mean someone who's spent money and deserves for that money to be taxed in the correct way so that my services are paid for by the government. So there's a little article and a concept for consumers that you may not have thought of before. Any questions? Comment below.